Ladies, gents, thems, my name is Ash Morgan and welcome to my channel. Here we talk about all things gay history, so if queer historical figures are your vibe, then go ahead and like and subscribe. Okay, so today we've got the juicy history of homosexuality in China and Korea. Now obviously this is not an exhaustive video. I'm mostly focusing on lesbians and women in ancient China and Korea. And I just want to do a little disclaimer before we start that I am literally just starting to learn about ancient Chinese and Korean cultures, so I am not an expert on it. So I'm trying my best, so if I miss anything or mess anything up, then feel free to kindly correct me below so we can all learn together. I just want to first start with a little bit of history for those of you who don't know much about Imperial China and Korea. So China, believe it or not, was actually really tolerant of homosexuality throughout pretty much all of Imperial China. A lot of people were more on the bisexual spectrum. In China, they didn't necessarily expect you to choose one gender or the other. Of course, let me just say that it was mostly the men that got to participate in this kind of activity because the men were the ones that were in control and had any kind of right. The basic idea was to have kids and take care of your family, and if you were doing those things, then go do whatever the hell you want. Go stick your thing wherever you want to stick it, basically. So many of the kings actually had their own male favorites along with their courtesans. So it was super common practice to be getting down with both the ladies and the men. And like I said, in China, they didn't expect you to choose. They didn't expect you to say that you were gay or straight. You could kind of just do your own thing. And especially if you were in power, you could really do your own thing. A lot of the reason why people were so okay with this was the Buddhist idea of karmic hangovers. So basically in China, one of the biggest religions was Buddhism. They believed in reincarnation. So they basically thought that you lived a life and then you got reincarnated into your next life and then into your next life and into your next life. And the idea of karmic hangovers was that, oh, I was a girl in my past life, but now I'm a man. So this makes sense why I'm attracted to men, because I used to be attracted to men in my past life. They thought that like, oh, you found one of your past lovers, one of your past lives in this life, and they just so happened to have been reincarnated in a different gender's body. Everything was going pretty chill, pretty swimmingly in China until the West invaded, brought all of their morally superior progressive ideals to China. We know how great Western Europe was doing in like the 1700s on when it came to homosexuality. In other words, not great. And these Western people entered China, obviously trying to take over and do their colonialism thing. And they were just taken aback at how just morally backward everyone was. And they started shaming everybody and making them feel like shit and making them think that this whole thing you're doing is just not okay. Okay, so just a couple hundred years of Western influence was able to completely destroy millennia of tolerance in China. Thank you so much, Western Europe, for bringing your high moral standards to China. Real fast, let me just explain why I'm tying Korea and China together anyway in this video. And China and Korea had very similar cultures and hierarchical systems because basically China convinced Korea that they were the center of the universe, and they convinced Korea that the Chinese emperor was basically like the conduit between Earth and God. Like they were like almost like demigods, like they were the ones that basically had all the power, which isn't that what every man with power has thought all throughout history anywhere you go? So basically how the hierarchy went in terms of like the different countries, it was like China, Korea, rest of the world. Like the rest of the world might as well have been like heathens to them. Basically, Korea had a lot of very similar customs, art, all that jazz to China. Let me just give you a nice little quote from MJ Seth to explain this whole situation further. He said, "But this did not result in a loss of separate identity, nor did Korea's membership in the tributary system in which the Korean king became a vassal of the Chinese emperor mean that Korea was less than fully independent. In fact, Koreans were fiercely independent. Korea's position as a tributary state was usually ceremonial, and for Koreans, it did not imply a loss of autonomy. Chinese attempts to interfere in domestic affairs were met with opposition." So it's not like Koreans were just like bending over and just like, yes, China, like, yes. They just like saw them for the good that they were, and they were like, okay, we'll keep as much peace as we can, but don't you try to usurp too much power. Well, one of those customs that they did adopt from China was polygamy, or concubines. So this is a tale as old as time. Concubines, men in power being able to truck whoever the hell they want. But the whole idea of concubines was, so men needed all these women. At least the emperors and higher up men needed all these women. But don't get the wrong idea. It wasn't just because they were horny. No. In fact, that wasn't the reason at all. It was basically their royal duty to spread their royal godly seed as far as they possibly could. So basically, back in the day in Imperial China, for centuries and centuries, it would be the job of royal unit, basically men who had been castrated, who did not have like sexual desire themselves, to go out throughout the lands and find the hottest, most eligible ladies to come be the men's like consorts. Choose the prettiest girls, bring in the top like 3,000 or something like that, and then they would do rigorous testing for the next few days. And they basically, the first day it would be like, okay, you're too tall, you're too short, you're too fat, you're too skinny, you're out. Brings the numbers way down. Then they would do gynecological exams. So if your flower was not perfect, you're cut. They also cared about your voice, how you sounded. So then they end up finding the top 50 out of like 3,000 women, and they'd bring them to the palace to become the royal concubines. The thing is, like, I feel like when I hear concubines, I just think of them as being like sex slaves, which I'm not gonna say that they weren't, but in Imperial China, you could actually move up classes by being a concubine. So there was basically the queen, and then like, I can't remember the name, but like the second queen basically right below her, that was the concubine. And then like, I want to say like 5 to 10 other statuses that you could be of concubine, like high up concubines, like the best of the best concubines. You were esteemed in society. Like, it wasn't a low level thing to be a concubine. Like, you were up there in the palace. However, once you were in the palace, you were supposed to completely forget your outside life, and you were not allowed outside of the palace ever again. Like, this is your stomping grounds, we own you, you're here. We'll give you a lavish lifestyle if you just play by the rules. Imperial China was a time period that was much more free for men. Women obviously did not have as much of a choice. Women didn't really have as much of a say in anything. So if you were gonna go, like, be a lesbian in Imperial China, how are you supposed to make money? How are you supposed to make a living? How are you supposed to take care of yourself? You have no rights. So it was a little more difficult. And there's a lot less accounts of lesbianism in Imperial China. However, we do know that it does exist. We do know that eroticists and pornographers, which yes, those existed back in the day, were very fond of lesbians and their imagery, as you can see by this painting that was probably painted around the 1600s in the Ming Dynasty. Yeah, it got a little freaky back then. It got freaky. It was not tame and boring like you might think about Imperial China. There was actually a common trope that happened within the palace between all the women that were there. So between different slaves and servants and concubines. Like, it was not uncommon for two women to basically get into a relationship and form like a husband-wife situation, and they would call it dui shi, which literally translates to face to face. They would get intensely jealous of anybody else trying to like get with their gal, and they basically were lesbian relationships within the palace. I'm just gonna say, like, this was probably the best case scenario for a lesbian back in the day, because you're in the palace, you have a job, you have, like, you're protected, you're taken care of, like, you're not out on the streets trying to make a living. So there was actually a story in the Ming Dynasty. For the record, the Ming Dynasty is where a lot of the stuff is happening. Ming Dynasty was loosey-goosey and open. They were from about the 1300s to the 1600s. So this was back in the day, so they were pretty tolerant. There was a story called Pitying the Fragrant Companion by Li Yu. And basically, this whole story that was written back between the 1300s and 1600s was about an older woman who fell in love with a younger woman. But the older woman was married to a man, and she literally prayed and prayed to be turned into a man, which, shocker, didn't work. So instead, she started dressing like a man. But she still gets taken away from her lover. They get separated. So she ends up going to her husband and begging him to take her lover on as a concubine. And then they basically become like a threesome relationship and get to like hook up together. Like, I mean, I guess this is the second best option. Worked for them. In another Ming era book, there's a really, really, really great quote that I need to just share this passage from this book with you. Lady Precious Yin and Mistress White Jade lay on top of each other, their legs intertwined so that their jade gates pressed together. They then moved in a rubbing and jerking fashion against each other like fishes gobbling flies or water plants from the surface. But don't you worry, that's not the end. We didn't forget the man, because the next line is, Great Lord Yang then thrust his jade root in between them until they all shared the ultimate simultaneously. So of course there had to be a man involved, but I will say, hey, Like, at least they were all sharing the ultimate simultaneously. This kind of shows they were prioritizing like female pleasure, at least to some extent. What a revolutionary concept. There also was a story of a man named General Ling Ji from 159 AD, so this is way back in the day, who had a wife and a male slave. But he actually would let his wife and his male slave have sex together, and they would have like threesomes together. People at the time thought this was worthy of note to write down because it was just so uncommon for this like master basically to be wanting his wife and male slave, like male lover, to also be enjoying pleasure instead of just pleasuring him. Revolutionary concept. Okay, so now on to my new favorite Sapphic poet. I can't even tell you, first of all, how many Sapphic poets there are in the world apparently throughout history. Like, I just keep finding new ones, and with every single one I find, I'm like, this is my new favorite lesbian poet, and then I find another one that just is amazing. And currently the fave is Woozow, who was born in 1799. From what I know of that era, this was like the time period when the Western influences were starting to take over China, so it was not so much of a friendly place for homosexual activities. So she was honestly revolutionary to be just doing her thing in this time period. She reminds me so much of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. You can go watch her. She was pretty much doing the same shit, but in the 1600s, New Spain and Mexico. So basically Woozow was the daughter of a merchant and the wife of a different merchant, and apparently according to history, like, those relationships were not good, neither of them. So nobody in her family apparently could read or write, so we're not even sure where she learned to read or write, but she made it a point to learn. And at that time period, it was, you know, with all the Western influence, the whole like Christian ideal of a woman with no talents is a virtuous woman was like very much a thing in the culture. And she basically was like, F all that noise, like, no thank you. And she actually ended up becoming a published poet and playwright and composer, and just really letting all of her talents shine as she was not meant to. So a very unvirtuous woman. Well, she actually wrote a whole opera. Most of her things that she wrote had feminist themes, were speaking out against the establishment and women's roles in society. So she actually wrote a whole opera about a woman who ends up cross-dressing and then painting a self-portrait of herself and lamenting over how shitty society is and how it sucks that she doesn't even get to like share her talents with the world because it's not acceptable in that time period, and how much it sucks to be a woman and like her gender roles at the time, which is just like a revolutionary opera to be writing in the early 1800s when Western influence is starting to come to China. So unfortunately, we do not have a lot of English resources about her life, but one of the things that we do know for sure is that she did have a lot of female friends and lovers throughout her life, and she wrote a lot of erotic poems and songs for these lovers, many of which were courtesans. So here is my new favorite poem by Woozow, For the Courtesan Qing Lin. On your slender body, your jade and coral girdle ornaments chime like those of a celestial companion, come from the green jade city of heaven. One smile from you when we meet, and I become speechless and forget every word. For too long, you have gathered flowers and leaned against the bamboos, your green sleeves growing cold in your deserted valley. I can visualize you all alone, a girl harboring her cryptic thoughts. You glow like a perfumed lamp in the gathering shadows. We play wine games and recite each other's poems. Then you sing Remembering South of the River with its heartbreaking verses. Then we paint each other's beautiful eyebrows. I want to possess you completely, your jade body and your promised heart. It is spring. Vast mists cover the 5 lakes. My dear, let me buy a red painted boat and carry you away. Like, it gives me goosebumps. The visuals are so good, and just the nature illusions that I feel like so much Chinese writing has. It's just so great. You could say the dirtiest or like raunchiest thing if you wanted to and make it sound so beautiful with all that imagery. Like, oh, I love that poem. Unfortunately, as far as I know, I think there's only about 3 of her poems that are translated in English, so that's my favorite one. Enjoy that. Woozow, what a gal. I wish I had more information on her, but that's all we know, unfortunately. Korea shared a lot of similar influences from China. However, Korea did not share the same belief when it came to free love and homosexuality. Historically, in Korea, it was a lot more bigoted. There still were definitely queer figures, especially queer men in power, who were able to get away with a lot more stuff. But just to kind of like give you an idea of what we're working with here, our first just little story, there was a king named Haegong of Silla who was born in 758 and died in 780. He was crowned king when he was only 8 years old, and historians of his era described him as a man by appearance but a woman by nature. His people were weirded out by his femininity. Like, they did not think he was masculine or strong enough, and they ended up causing a rebellion and killing him and his wife over being too feminine. So actually, modern historians do believe that Haegong was possibly a trans woman. If not that, it does seem that he or she was at least some level of queer. A nice little background story to get us into this new story about Crown Princess Sun Bin-bong of Joseon. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing everything like so terribly. I'm trying my best, okay? Well, Sun Bin-bong was born in 1414 and married to the Crown Prince Munjong of Joseon. Sun Bin-bong came into the palace after her husband, the crown prince, had just banished his first wife for witchcraft. So we can already tell that this is a really great and safe place for women. Obviously, we love a good witchcraft banning. So our story starts with the crown prince getting his concubine pregnant before Sun Bin-bong. And this pissed her off, okay? She ends up going to her husband and she's like, this should not be happening. I'm your wife, like I should be getting pregnant before your hoe. Like, you need to spend more time with me. We need to have a baby. And so he spends more time with her. They get down a lot more and she ends up getting pregnant. Well, she claims that she ends up having a miscarriage and then she secretly buries the baby without her husband there. Now her husband is kind of like, why did you do that? That's weird. Like, why did you not want me there? Why did you not want me to see the baby? He's weirded out. So he sends his servants to go dig up the grave and bring him the baby. Well, what do the servants find? Just an empty blanket that's been buried. So we don't know, like, was she ever pregnant? Did she just have a miscarriage really soon? Did she even get pregnant at all? We don't know. But this was strike one that basically started the court kind of like being suspicious and wary of her. Well, strike two. As I said earlier, once you are living in the palace, you belong to the palace. You do not leave the palace, you do not talk to people outside the palace. So Sun Bin-bong was actually sending some of her like royal clothing and leftover food from the banquets to her family outside the palace. And this pissed the court off. So strike three. Her dad ends up dying and her aunt actually ends up coming to the palace to visit her and pay her respects. Well, this is just way against protocol. The court is pissed. How dare she have any kind of relationship with her aunt? How dare she give a fuck about her dad just dying? Like, she's owned by the palace now. She should be only caring about the palace goings on. So she is on thin ice, okay? We love a good lesbian cherry on top. So the final thing that puts her over the edge is the court ends up finding out that she has been sleeping with her maid, Tsao. So then her husband, the crown prince, ends up coming to her and he's like, why? Why did you do this? And she pulls the whole, like, I just love you so much, but you don't love me, and like, I never even get to see you, and like since I couldn't have you in my bed, I needed to have someone in my bed to keep me warm, you know? Which, honestly, valid point. Like, her husband's allowed to go sleep with whoever he wants and get down with as many women as he wants, but she's just supposed to be loyal to him and just be waiting around. Like, it makes no sense. So I can honestly see her point, and honestly, I would rather be getting down with Tsao too. Honestly, we don't really know like how Tsao felt about this. Like, was she in on it? Were they like actual lovers? Was she coerced? We don't know. Of course, I'd like to think that she was not coerced, but we just don't know. All we do know is that she did tell the court that Sun Bin had undressed her and laid next to her as if with a man, while the rest of the maids slept on the other side of a screen. Which sounds very not private, and I feel like all those maids must have known literally every single thing that was happening at any given moment. So yeah, I don't know if she was like coerced into this testimony or if she like wasn't even into it the whole time and was being coerced into sleeping with Sun Bin-bong in the first place. We don't know. This did not sit well with the court. But believe it or not, they weren't as pissed about the fact that she was sleeping with a woman as they were with the fact that she was sleeping with a member of the Nobi enslaved class, which were basically the bottom of the barrel in medieval Korean times. So what became of her? Well, she got demoted to a commoner and banished from the palace. What do you think? Also at the time, this was a huge scandal, and the palace basically needed to call in a PR team to address the whole thing to all the commoners and stuff, because they could not have everybody in their kingdom knowing that the crown princess had slept with a woman, member of the Nubian slave class. Like, can you imagine? Can you imagine what that would say about them? So instead they came up with a generic lie that she was cast out due to her deficiencies of character, such as frequent lying and extreme jealousy. Which honestly, who could even blame her if she was extremely jealous? I feel like any of the women in the court who were with the prince or the king would feel the same way. But that's what they decided to go with. That was the story. We honestly don't know what became of her, unfortunately. I just like to think that she lived a much happier, family-filled, lesbian lover-filled life outside of the palace. I also want to note that just 50 years before this, King Gongmin of Goryeo from 1325 to 1374 literally created a whole ministry with the sole purpose to find and recruit attractive young men for him to get down with. So the double standards are just, just perfect. We love it. We love to see men getting away with shit and women getting banished from palaces for doing the same shit. Okay, well that is all I have for you on homosexuals in ancient China and Korea. Like I said, if I missed anything or messed anything up, do kindly correct me below so we can all learn together. And then go ahead and comment below anybody who you would like me to cover in the future. And like and subscribe to help me out. If you want to go follow my Instagram and TikTok, that would also really help me out. My TikTok engagement has been complete shit, but I have a ton of queer history facts on there and I think it's interesting content, so go give it a follow. If you would like to have a similar hat to me and twin with me, I've got the links below for that for GGPIP. I also have a free shipping code too, so check that out. Also go ahead and check out one of my past videos, like this one on Swarwan and De La Cruz and this one on La Mupa, who are both bad nuns from the 17th century. Okay, thanks for stopping by. I appreciate you watching so much, and I will see you next week. Bye!